In a previous video, I very briefly described the best practices of elicitation. Now in this one, we'll go a little bit deeper into that, okay? As I said there's no kind of in real life we're talking about different shades of right or wrong, so it's not just black and white, and we don't have any kind of a set of good practices that would be applied under all circumstances. In real life that's not the case. You can just talk about good practices, those that you can imagine that would work, that you can assume that in many cases it would work. And these are what good practices are, and that's very important to discuss about that. So I have already kind of given the list in a previous video, so you have to define the product, or not have to, but it's a very good practice to define the product vision and project scope, identify stakeholders, user classes, and select a product champion or a product owner for each user class, and use multiple elicitation techniques to get the requirements. Not just go ad hoc, use some techniques and properly use them. Okay, let's start with the new one, the first one, defining product vision and project scope. So what is a vision? Product's vision or a product's outcome. So basically when we're trying to define the vision, we are answering the question of what does the company expect to achieve with this particular product. That's what we are seeking for, or that's what a vision defines. Okay, scope is basically the boundary between what is in and what is out, not more than that. So all these like the vision, product vision and scope translate into business requirements, but business requirements will have, you'll see, more than just these two, but the business requirements are mainly stored, or let's say documented, in a vision and scope document or a business requirements document. That's also possible, or project chart or a business case document, market requirements document for commercial software, and so on. So these are the different other names that we see being used in practice. So owner of the vision and scope document is the project sponsor, so funding authority, or someone or someone in a similar role. So how do you construct a vision statement? So we have from one of the books that we suggest for this course, from Wiegers and Betty. So we have a kind of template that you can use to define a vision statement for a particular product. So I'm not going into details. In fact, you would see, particularly in this particular module, elicitation, there will be much more material than I'll cover in the wording. So I'll basically leave you with the handouts with more material for you to study later. So there's this vision statement. Essentially, we'll be asking you to also use this template to define a vision statement for your software system or IT system for your assignment in the vision and scope document, assignment A. Okay, so there's this example that you can make use of later on. If you like, I can also close myself. And again, I'm not going to read this. You can read in your own time. So basically, you have to define the target customer, statement of the need or an opportunity, and the category, perhaps major capabilities, benefits, and the reasons why you buy or you'd like to use this software, and perhaps put it in context with the competitive alternative systems, or recurrent system or current business process, and how that particular product you have in mind would be different than the existing ones, or what type of advantages would that bring on top of the existing ones, or to address the challenges that are available if there's no existing system there. This is a vision statement that you can make use of. Scope. How would you represent the scope? A good practice for representing a scope is in fact using a context diagram. It's in fact, this follows the same example from the previous one, and I'm going to close myself again. So what you see here, this diagrams shows the connections between the system, your system that you would like to build, that you would like to have in the future, and basically everything else in the universe, if you like. So in this example, we have this chemical tracking system, and you see all other systems, or in this case, all other external entities that this system is somehow one way or another interacting with. So it's a good way, a nice way to show in just one figure what that particular system, or the context in which this system will operate, and what is in and what is out. I mean, you can imagine that in fact, I mean, it's not always very easy to define the scope, and that's the reason why we are doing it. In many cases, you would see in real life that it is much more difficult than you would think to define a scope. I mean, to put a particular functionality in or out of your system. So this context diagram is known to help you in defining that. Okay, so that's this context diagram, and again, it's a good practice to use a context, or to come up with a context diagram for your assignment as well. Okay, the second good practice, user classes, identifying user classes, selecting a product champion or a product owner. So let's look at an example. So we can talk about the stakeholder. We can think about the Commerce stakeholders, or if you like, user classes. So we can think about students, we can think about lecturers, and of course we can think about responsible lecturers or guest lecturers, or assistants, research assistants, student assistants who are helping us. These are all different user stakeholders, or different user classes, if you like. Course schedulers, administrative staff, department teaching heads, and or portfolio holders of education, and so on. So as you can see, even in the Canvas, we can talk about several user classes or stakeholders that you would need to take into consideration while eliciting information, because you can imagine that every single stakeholder or every single user class might need something specific in that particular system, at least if not security, let's say access rights and so on, if nothing. What else? So in fact, as you can imagine, selecting a project champion really helps you to have a one line of kind of communication between vast majority of user classes, or let's say vast majority of people in the same user classes. So it's a good idea to select one representative of this user class to channel the information in a much more effective way. To bridge the link between the end users and the business analysis team. So we expect, of course, some nice, let's say, characteristics of these product champions. They should be enthusiastic about this, the new system. They should be good communicators anyway, so they shouldn't be a shy people or anything. Has some authority on the user requirements granted by the management. That's also important. So if you find a product champion who's always kind of in a very hesitating mode, and always have to go back and ask questions and come back, that's quite a time-consuming process to wait and get that thing, which usually asynchronous. So you'd better have someone there who also has the authority to say, no, this should be like that and this should be like that. Effective communicators, as we mentioned, and it is very critical, in fact, for the success of the project. As I very beginning, as I said it, the success of the project very much depends on the extent of communication that you can set up with your users or with your stakeholders. Again, if there's a lack of communication, if lack of involvement of stakeholders, you're doomed. You're just like, that's a recipe for failure. So in that sense, finding the right stakeholders, first of all, and selecting the right product champion or product owner is very, very critical. In some projects, I mean, I've been in some projects where it was just like we were able to kind of do the project just because we had excellent user product champions there, basically, really. And then later on, once during the operations, they have those people who acted like product champions. They've grown quite a lot. They have been promoted quite significantly to, or let's say promoted to very significant roles later on in the organization. That's quite important. So yeah, that's important to note, I would say. Third practice, use multiple elicitation techniques. Again, you just don't go and start an ad hoc thing with your stakeholders. It's a good idea, a very good practice to use, in fact, multiple elicitation techniques to get that information, to gather that information, using a kind of structured techniques or methods to do that would really be very useful. What do we have here? So document analysis, analysis of existing systems are just those two that we know would work, and they don't involve much stakeholder communication in this case. So you can just, I mean, you can just do the document analysis yourself, background study, or you can just analyze the existing yourself. Obviously, it would involve some communication with the stakeholders, but not as much as you would see later on in interviews and focus groups or workshops. Benchmarking and market analysis, we'll see about that later on, essentially in another module, or data mining. And these are new ways to essentially gather information. And we'll spend another, in fact, module on these two. But communication-heavy techniques involve the following: interviews, workshops, focus groups, questionnaires, observation, and scenarios. There are also other kind of techniques that we use, but whether they are elicitation techniques or just requirements analysis techniques is kind of still under discussion, I would say. Use case modeling, data modeling, process analysis, or prototyping, or all these kind of techniques, whether they are requirements analysis techniques, whether they are elicitation techniques, I think it's not very important. Just use them. That's what the message should be, I would say. So as I already hinted, more about these two, benchmarking, market analysis, and data mining, in the component of REM, and more about the following ones, the use cases, the use case modeling, and so on, data modeling, prototyping, are in the later, in fact, I think next week or next module will be about requirements analysis and modeling, and we'll be spending a little bit more time on these. But for now, that is it for this particular module. We'll be discussing more about these techniques in separate modules. See you there.